For those of you that don't know us, the Money and Mental Health Policy Institute is an independent charity committed to breaking the links between financial difficulty and mental health problems. We conduct research, develop practical policy solutions, and work in partnership with both those providing services and those using them to find what really works. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this event, which is the first public event in a 2-year programme of work aimed at increasing action among the financial services industry to tackle gambling-related harms. I know that it can be both easier and more difficult to join events at the moment. There's less travelling involved for most of us, of course, but also we all have a lot on our plates at the moment. So we're delighted today to be joined by a range of really expert speakers on this topic, including some speakers with lived experience of gambling problems, and to have a fantastic audience of over 170 people working in the financial services industry with both the reach and the power to make a real difference in people's lives. So I want to start by just saying thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us. We really appreciate it and hope you find this a fruitful morning's time. The numbers of people in the UK with a clinical gambling addiction are relatively small, about 0.7% of the population. There is, though, some evidence that this has increased in recent months with the stresses and strains of lockdown. But even before gambling becomes a clinical problem, it can cause serious financial harm and distress. Like much of Money and Mental Health's work, there's a complex causality at play. And untangling the links between gambling behaviours, mental health and financial difficulties can be very difficult. Our independent research, most recently the Safer Bet report, explores some of these issues. But the other thing that we try very hard to do here at Money and Mental Health is drive real practical change. And today we'll be talking about themes that are prevalent through much of our work. How do we help people stay in control? In this case, their gambling behaviours and their financial situation? And how do we help people find support when they need it? Money and mental health research has shown that both of those things can be incredibly difficult when you're experiencing poor mental health. And so today we're looking forward to showcasing some of the innovative work that financial services firms are already doing to support customers who are struggling with gambling. We know that this isn't straightforward, and there are difficult balances to strike. So we'll also explore some of the challenges that firms are encountering in doing this work and the opportunities for further innovation. Today forms part of a 2-year programme of work in support of the National Strategy to Reduce Gambling Harms, funded by the Gambling Commission through a regulatory settlement, and is the first of a series of events we'll be running over the coming months to explore some of these issues in more depth and start identifying the steps that are needed to drive forward further progress. What we really hope to do today and over the next year is to help you identify the practical steps that you can take as financial services firms to support customers and tackle gambling-related harms. But before we go too far into this, I also think it's important to say that we don't believe this is entirely the role of the financial services industry, and clearly a multi-sector approach is needed. Money and Mental Health's independent research over the next few months will also build on our examination of online gambling over the summer to explore where else policy action is needed to help people stay in control. But I know you know that as a financial services industry, you have the reach and the power to make a real difference to people's lives. And I hope you'll approach today and the rest of this programme of work in that spirit. So before we get any further, I have just a little bit of housekeeping to do. Hopefully the Hopin platform is working beautifully for you all. If you have any questions for our speakers, particularly in the panel sessions a little bit later today, please use the event chat that's on your screen. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please alert the Money and Mental Health team in a direct message or an email to contact@moneyandmentalhealth.org. That's contact@moneyandmentalhealth.org. That will help us get technical help to you as quickly and directly as we possibly can. After the first session, we'll have an opportunity for some one-to-one networking. I will tell you a bit more about that later on. It's important to know it's optional, but hopefully it will help us create some of those moments for connection and reflection that we've lost a little bit as we've moved from in-person to online events. So With that housekeeping out of the way, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce our first speaker, Neil McArthur, who's Chief Executive of the Gambling Commission. Neil is responsible for the development and the delivery of the Commission's strategy. He joined the Commission in 2006 and has played a leading role in the evolution of its approach to licensing and regulation. Prior to being made Chief Executive, he was the Commission's General Counsel. He's a qualified solicitor in 1997 and is a graduate of Leicester Polytechnic and Leicester University, and has previously worked for a number of public bodies, including the General Teaching Council for England, the Learning and Skills Council, and several local authorities. So lots of experience to bring today. Neil, over to you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me clearly. I'm having to do this via my phone rather than through computers. I had a few glitches, but hopefully this is working. At the Gambling Commission, we're determined to use all the tools at our disposal to make gambling safer. And we've deliberately set out to disrupt old ways of thinking, to raise standards for consumers. There are some people who question that approach, but complex issues, and I think we can all agree that gambling-related harm is a complex issue, require a range of perspectives and a range of participants to solve them. I mean, there are no silver bullets here. It's easy to come up with sound bites, but real change takes hard work, collaboration and innovation in lots of different areas. And if we're to achieve a lasting reduction in gambling-related harm, there must be a multi-sector partnership approach. And within that, the financial sector has a vitally important role to play for reasons that I'll explain. And that's why I'm so pleased to be able to speak to you today, because I need your help. And more importantly, there are vulnerable people who need your help. So moving on to the next slide, please. This project, engaging financial services firms in work to reduce gambling harms, is funded from a penalty package that followed an enforcement case by the Commission. This is really important work. It forms part of a range of actions that we're taking as part of the national strategy to reduce gambling harms. And that's a strategy that the Commission launched last year. The publication of that strategy and the use of penalty packages to fund vitally important work are just two examples of things we have done to disrupt old ways of thinking. A third example is the establishment of an interim experts by experience group. And colleagues on that group have direct, tragic personal experience of the harm gambling can cause. And I don't pretend for a minute that I can put myself in their shoes. But I do share their passion to make things better. And I know that their experiences and insights can accelerate the progress we're making. I therefore welcome the inclusion of experts by experience in today's conference, and drives me and my colleagues to do better and go faster is the fact that we estimate that there are 340,000 people in Great Britain who are problem gamblers. And that is far too high, and whilst problem gambling rates are not increasing, they aren't yet decreasing. And that is what we want to see, a drastic reduction in the number of people being harmed by gambling. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. The national strategy provides a framework for planning and intervention by partners in health and the third sector, as well as gambling operators and the Commission itself. But it's important to remember that it's not the Gambling Commission's strategy. In fact, most of the elements of the strategy require action by others. For example, research programs to broaden understanding of the problem and how best to tackle it, and the development of appropriate clinical interventions throughout the country and education to prevent harm occurring in the first place. And that is why this project and the action from the financial sector is so important. Because, as I said at the outset, harnessing diverse perspectives and expertise leads to better solutions. On the next slide then, please. It's always been obvious to me that no one person or group has all the answers. Solving complex questions and problems requires collaboration between people with diverse ranges of backgrounds, specialisms and opinions. This can be uncomfortable at times and it can lead to disagreement and conflict, but constructive conflict and disagreement often leads to better solutions. As the national regulator of gambling, the Commission has an important role to play and significant powers. For example, we banned gambling with credit cards earlier this year. As the evidence showed, consumers gambling on credit cards created a risk of harm. That was an important step, but there are other steps that can be taken by our partners that will help the overall system protect vulnerable consumers better. That is why we're so pleased that there are an increasing number of banks looking at how they can protect vulnerable consumers. For example, we've seen a number of banks offering gambling blocks to their customers to help control their finances and avoid harm. We welcome that, and we would like to work with partners in the finance sector to find other innovative ways to reduce gambling related harm. Another example is what we're calling the Single Customer View project. That's a project we're running with the support of the Information Commissioner's Office, in which we've challenged gambling operators and technology suppliers to work together to find a way of producing a holistic view of a customer's gambling. Now think back to the video I showed a few moments ago. If every operator had known that customer was vulnerable, they'd have been able to take action sooner. And that's why the project is so important. And the financial sector has an important part to play in that, because financial services providers already have a single view of their customers' financial transactions. The evidence we have from experts by experience suggests that opportunities to protect people are being missed. And that happens because their financial transactions show spending that gambling operators are not questioning. That's why today's conference is so important. Reducing gambling related harm needs everyone to play their part. And as I said at the beginning, I need your help. And much, much more importantly, there are vulnerable people who need your help. And if we work together, I know we can help them. So next slide, please. Earlier I said there were around 340,000, sorry, could we move on to the next slide, sorry. Earlier I said that there are around 340,000 problem gamblers in Great Britain, but that doesn't tell the full story. If you look at this slide, this is what the world would look like as 100 people. It's the general population, and what you see is that 3 people are at low risk of harm, 1 at moderate risk, and half a person is a problem gambler. But this picture is misleading. 53 of our people don't gamble at all. If we move on to the next slide, this is what the world would look like if it were made up of 100 gamblers. And what you see here is 4.5 are now at low risk, 2 people are at moderate risk, and 1 person is a problem gambler. But we can go further, as the next slide will show. What about people who are highly engaged with gambling? 14 are now at low risk, 9 at moderate risk, and sadly 6 of these people are problem gamblers. And highly engaged gamblers are even more problematic. So in terms of next steps on the final slide to conclude, we're still waiting details of the government's Gambling Act review, which will, of course, be something that the Commission will want to support and use our data expertise and experience to help. But we're not going to wait for that review to make progress. We will shortly launch a consultation on customer interaction and how gambling operators should use affordability to keep consumers safer. At the end of October, we're introducing new strict guidance for high value or VIP customers. And we're already working with the Financial Conduct Authority to see how we can build on their work to deal with financial vulnerability. So I want to conclude by saying thank you for joining today's conference. Thank you to MMHPI for working with us to help make gambling safer. And if you only take one thought away from what I've said, let it be this. What are the top 3 opportunities that financial services providers have to protect vulnerable consumers, and how can we work together to take those opportunities? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neil, for those thoughts. It's really helpful to see that breakdown across the population of who exactly we're talking about as at risk here. And I know data is going to be a very strong theme, both in today's conversation and going forward to this project of work, something that Money and Mental Health we have great interest in, and I know the financial services providers we're talking to do as well. Lots to think about there. Now we're going to hear from an expert by experience and member of the Money and Mental Health research community, Nicky Davies. Nicky is an independent mental capacity advocate. She has personal experience of struggling with gambling, and it's had a significant impact on both her financial situation and her mental health. Nicky believes that the financial services sector can play an important role in helping people with mental health problems protect themselves from gambling-related harms. Nicky pre-recorded a conversation with my colleague Kate a few days ago, and here's the tape.
Hi Nicky, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. We really appreciate it. So Nicky, you've had experiences of struggling with gambling. Can you tell me a bit more about when you first started having difficulties with gambling and how, if at all, this was affected by your mental health?
The first memories are slot machines when I was sort of, I don't know, about 19, 20 maybe. And then when I started getting a wage, I'd literally put all my wage in it, because the slot machine, I worked at a football club and the slot machine was on site. So it was like, get my wage at 12 o'clock on a Friday and it was gone within an hour or so. I'm not talking a lot of money then, but it was a lot of money as a kid. So that was kind of the first sort of little bit of dabbling with gambling. But then the real problem started when I got seriously ill with my mental health, which was in 2007. And a friend suggested to me to play Baccarat, which is on one of the gaming sites. And at first I found it really boring. But at that time I was like awake sort of 18 hours a day. And now it was just, my mate just kind of suggested it because she was worried about me, because I just couldn't see a way out of getting better. So initially, like I say, nothing interested me, so I found it boring. And then I don't kind of know how it changed, in the fact that I became obsessed with it, and I was playing it like 18 hours a day, not eating, not sleeping. I was just on it all the time. And then it got to a stage where this was probably about the September when I first got a massive loan off the bank and clipped the 18 grand. Played it on Baccarat, and I was betting thousands at this point. Before it was just like £2 and £3, but then I got to betting thousands, and that was literally on the turn of a card, be it turn of whether it'll be a 7 or a red or a black. It was that bad. Got all the way down to £1,000, and I had my mate who introduced me to Baccarat on the phone saying, "What are you going to do?" And I had no idea. I'm going to try and win it back. So all that night, I managed to get back up to the 18 grand. As soon as I got to the 18 grand, had the presence of mind to, right, give it to the bank back, and then that was it. But of course, the next month, I got another offer of £15,000, did exactly the same thing, got it down to just a couple £100, and then got it back up. And then you would have thought, right, you've learned now twice, you've nearly got caught big time, don't do it again. But no, I got a letter off of the employers where I worked, because I'd been off work 6 months by that point, saying they weren't going to pay me anymore. And I just panicked, and I mean panicked. So I got the letter on, say, a Wednesday. On the Thursday, I clicked the button again. This was for £14,000. And within 15 minutes, I'd lost the lot. And that again was on Baccarat. And from then, I have stages where if I'm really, really feeling hopeless, pointless, there's not caring, don't care what happens to me, kind of wanting to sabotage my life, then I just go to gambling. And I've no idea why, because I don't get, where people talk about a buzz, I don't get a buzz. I don't play it to lose, because that's ridiculous. I don't know why I do it. I don't know how I can put £1,000 on the turn of a card. Yet if I had the cash in my hand, there's no way I could do it, and I can't understand that myself.
Yeah. And I mean, you've talked then about the money that you lost through that loan, and you know, what kind of impact has that had on your finances kind of in the longer term? Are you still in debt?
It's affected my life. It will affect my life now still for another 14 years. So from 2008 to when I'm going to be 67, really, because that's the end of my mortgage. I took out a secured loan. I thought I was given incorrect advice because I had no secured loans. And because of that 15 minutes of madness, where I don't believe I had capacity to do that, because I was so frightened that I was going to lose my dogs, my home and everything, because I'd got this letter. And it turned out the letter was sent incorrectly, which was corrected the next day. So it was just, a turn of events that literally has affected my whole life. And now I've got to find £230 odd every month. And I've had to do that since 2008.
And what kind of impact has that had on your mental health and your wider well-being?
Well, I've not got a family. My family and my dogs. I've got 3 little doggies now, and they're the only constant in my life. They're the only secure thing in my life. And Marnie, my little puppy, the middle one, she was knocked down and I was beside myself. That had happened. So my whole life, work and everything is geared to keeping a roof over their heads. Mm-hmm. So I think like my mum or dad would do with their child, you do everything you can to protect your children. Well, I'm like that. They're kind of my kids. So I just thought at that moment in time, I was doing the right thing to try and win some money to keep myself going, because I wasn't going to get a wage, and gambling is not the answer. But at that time, you can't see anything. You can't be rational. I think that's the biggest thing. All rationale goes out the window. Mm-hmm. And my friend was on the phone at the time I was doing it, shouting down the phone to me, telling me to stop, and I couldn't even hear her. Mm-hmm. I was just intent on trying to save my life via gambling.
Yeah. So what kind of things do you think that, say, the banks that you're with and other financial services firms could do to help someone in your situation?
Well, like about 3-4 months ago, I bet £3,000 and lost, and I withdrew £1,000 out the bank. Within 2 minutes, drew another £1,000 out the bank, and within another 2 minutes, drew another £1,000 out the bank. I think that there should be some kind of link, or they put some kind of flag like they do at hospitals when you have certain patients come in, where if that happens, they then block your account, or like they do when you go to buy something. So if I go into, say, Curry's, and I buy a 65-inch TV, and then 5 minutes later, after I've made that purchase, think, oh, I'll go and buy an oven for £600. They immediately flag that up, and they ring you, and they won't let the card transaction go through. So why can't they do that with gambling? So that after that first £1,000, so be it, I've made that mistake, I've done that. But then when it goes to the second £1,000, they've got to surely have some way of stopping that, to give that the gambler or that person thinking time. And if they ring up and they say, you bet you've wanting to take another £1,000 out to gamble with, are you sure? And I go, yes, it's my money and I'll do what I want. Fine, I'm an adult. But at least they've given me perhaps that time, and maybe that 2 minutes of them just talking to me might be the difference between me not doing anything, or not losing £3,000 where I've already lost £1,000.
And you've mentioned before as well that you think something like a default spending limit for gambling as well, that was kind of set automatically, might be helpful as well.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, I think maybe 0.1% of the population can afford to bet £1,000 on a turn of a card. So you're talking the other 99% of the population cannot do that. So why allow it to happen? And the bookies, they're really, really happy why they're taking your money. The second you start to win, they then bar you or stop you from gambling with them. So you can't win. You can't win even if you're trying to win. They just stop you, which is just unfair.
Thank you, Nicky. That's all really helpful. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us today.
Welcome. No worries. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nicky, for sharing your experiences with us and being so open about your struggles. I'm so grateful that you were able to help us ground today in that lived experience so early in our agenda. And I know that will help us have thoughtful conversations through the rest of this morning. I'm delighted now to introduce our next speaker and final keynote, Professor Henrietta Bowden-Jones, OBE. Professor Bowden-Jones is a medical doctor and neuroscience researcher, leading 2 national clinics in the UK, including the National Problem Gambling Clinic. She was appointed Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire in the 2019 New Year's Honours for services to addiction treatment and research. As well as graduating in medicine and specialising in psychiatry with a CCST in addiction psychiatry, Henrietta also pursued a research career and a medical doctorate in neuroscience from Imperial College. She is the founder and joint chair of the National UK Research Network for Behavioural Addictions and an executive board member of the International Society of Addiction Medicine, as well as the International Society for the Study of Behavioural Addictions. Henrietta, we are so pleased to have you with us here today. You are a world-leading expert, as all those letters after your name suggest on the subject. Over to you.
Thank you so much, and I hope I'm not going to disappoint you now by having a very informal talk about my thoughts and feelings about money and mental health in gambling, rather than giving you an academic talk. But really, after 12 years of leading the National Problem Gambling Clinic, I do believe that not just me, but my whole team, we have really gathered an understanding of the complex relationship between money and gambling disorder. And I thought I would use this opportunity today to share some of my thoughts. The first thing I'd like to say is I'm not just talking about gamblers today in terms of the adults, but because we have had the funding from NHS England to run the Young People Clinic, I will also be discussing the relationship to money of young people. And I'll also talk about the gamers, because don't forget, there has been a lot about the confluence of gambling and gaming in young people, and how the dysregulation in terms of reward pathways can occur much earlier than it used to prior to so many young people playing games. And this is because there are features in some games that make it very exciting for players to get involved with financial transactions. So the first thing I'd like to do is to talk about the thousands and thousands of people who we treat at the National Problem Gambling Clinic. I'm often astounded at the fact that they have been allowed to lose so much money. The most important thing to state is that the majority are coming through with large debts, and large can be something that is very individual to the person. People who are unemployed and have large debts owe different amounts of money normally to people who have very high paying jobs. But ultimately, in terms of mental health, the impact is enormous on each and every one of our patients. So we have debt and we have estimated total lifetime losses. This too is a big part of the information we collect, and the estimated lifetime losses can lead people into feeling absolutely suicidal because they cannot work out how on earth they will get out of this predicament. Often they are secretive about the losses. When they've lost the family home because they've used the money that was part of the savings for the mortgage, that kind of sharing of information often has not occurred with the partners, and this is very, very relevant in relation to mental health. So one of the things that we also come across quite a lot is the idea of the early big win. Most of you will be familiar with this, but what we find is that at least a third of our patients, if not more, experience some situation in which, whilst gambling early in their gambling career, before they were pathological, they end up winning money that really feels an enormous amount for them in their time of life. And this we know clinically, but we also know from international research, can trigger that dysfunctional pathway that causes people over the course of a lifetime to try and recapture that enormous high, that excitement. So it's not just about chasing losses that we know is part of the criteria for gambling disorder and something we often find, but it's a bigger, more exciting sort of chase. And that's very, very much linked to a pot of money, let's say. In relation to the National Centre for Gaming Disorders, I just want to mention that we need to be aware that 3/4 of young people are indeed gaming. And so we are seeing a very small minority of the gamers in the country, but the ones we see are frequently people who have incurred large amounts of debt by using parental credit cards. Neil has gone through the estimates in terms of the prevalence of gambling disorder, and each time we look at the prevalence, we look at the numbers, we must consider not just the individual, not just the almost 500,000 people with a problem, the almost 2 million people at risk, but of course their families, their children, and all the financial harm that the gambling is causing, not just one person, and indeed not just the family, but also the employers and the friends who've lent money, etc. So my big ask in this particular context is that we must ensure a new, proper, independent, large-scale prevalence study of gambling disorder, which includes some financial information, has to take place. And I am appalled, really, that this has not as yet happened, because there is little point in having a new Gambling Act working group if we don't understand the harm to society. So this is a call for action, really, in terms of our government and how quickly they should get on to commissioning this. And this should include children, because as we all know, there are at least 55,000 problem gambling children. There are at least another 70,000 or more who have at-risk behaviours. And despite gambling being illegal in children, we are dealing with financial consequences that will involve significant mental health issues. So I'm aware, I don't have long, so I've made a list of a few things that I think have made a real difference. First of all, the banning of credit cards has been significant. We have really felt that difference. The idea that no longer can people put gambling on credit cards has been great. So we know that things can change. On a negative note, we know that the availability 24/7 of opportunities online has totally revolutionized in a bad way the work that we are doing at the clinic, because our patients feel they can never escape. They can never get away from the next gambling opportunity. And this is important when we try and look at stopping them from impulsively spending their money, particularly on mobile phone gambling, where we know, half of people are doing the gambling on their phones, and that's even more available. The free money offers are very damaging, and I really think they trigger gambling for people who are vulnerable and must be stopped. Actually, I don't have any time for free money offers. Speed of play is important. People who are spending too much money are very attracted to fast games, and in-match betting has been very harmful financially. So I would say all of these things are important. In the couple of minutes I've got left, I'd like to say that Martin sent something to me which I really found interesting. The idea of NatWest being able to tell that 10% of their current accounts spent more than 25% of income with gambling merchant codes. I think that type of information is vital for us to understand the national impact across all population. We need to work with the banks in order to understand not just the 25%, but even 10% is far too much in terms of allocating funds to someone's everyday life. That's for most of the population. So I hope we will be able to collaborate on that. Other good work in my last minute left. Well, most certainly Monzo, Starling and the other banks, they have really changed and protected our patients as much as possible and allowed them an easier way to stay abstinent from gambling harm. But GamBan has helped, and so have the cash withdrawal limits of £10 that some of our patients do set for themselves. And don't forget, you stop a problem gambler taking money out, you are saving their families from domestic violence, from debt and from mental health issues all round. And therefore this has far wider impact than just the individual. And I think I'm now pretty much run out of time, so I would just like to end with a one sentence: no gambling for under 18s in any circumstance. They are impulsive, they need to be protected, they cannot afford to spend any money on gambling, and it will set them on the wrong course if they're vulnerable.
Thank you, Henrietta. It's so interesting to hear those insights from your clinic, where you are already finding that innovation from financial services firms and the credit card ban are having a real impact for people with the most severe sort of gambling problems. I hope that gives us hope that there is much the financial services industry can do that will make a real practical difference for people.